out of 34 leads you get, you're going to hire one of them. What about those other 33? The number of drivers that they expected you to hire, was that more than the previous year?
Yes, with a smaller budget.
Right. Okay.
You're going to have to do more.
Let me pass along that punch in the gut.
What is each major step in this process,
Right.
and where might we be losing potential hires along the way?
Welcome back, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Dave Arsenal.
Here. And welcome to
Digging deeper.
And we got a special surprise for you today. We brought Seth Becker back, and it's story time. He's going to tell us a story from his glorious past. What were you?
Director of recruiting,
Director
driver recruiting.
of recruiting. I'm sure there's a few of those out there. You see the title. The idea is, what's the average lead to hire ratio these days?
About 1 in 34.
Okay, 134. That's out of 34 leads you get, you're going to hire one of them. What about those other 33? What happened to them? Where did they go? And so Seth has a really unique story about this. He's going to tell it to us and may break out the old shiny efficiency formula. Ooh. So give us some background and of why this question became a source of inspiration for you.
Every year we would, in quarter 4, have to come up with a presentation of what kind of budget we wanted for the following year.
Right.
Not just a dollar amount, but everything you plan on doing with it.
Right.
Who you're going to be working with, what vendors, what new technology that you want. So a lot goes into it.
Can I ask you, during that time, what was the market like? Was there we need to grow? I mean, what was the sentiment around everything?
It was coming off a banner year, 2018, and expectations are high. But as we all know, 2019 wasn't the same as 2018.
Right. How many people, when you're giving the presentation, how many people are in the room when you're about to unveil this glorious masterpiece?
Right. You've got the primary decision makers, usually 2 or 3 members of the C-suite,
Right.
and then a couple of VPs are in the room. So it's an intimidating crowd.
You go into the room, little did he know, that decisions had already been made. So why don't you tell us about that?
I'd been through this rigmarole before, right, of, hey, put this fancy presentation together, come in, present it, and knowing that they're going to poke holes in it. So this particular year, having been through that a couple times already, it was, I'm going to be so well prepared, like when I say I'm the team, for this, that they're not going to be able to poke any holes in it. Lots of Excel spreadsheets, lots of historical data, just lots of resources there that we could draw on as they're asking tough questions. Right. So as we're presenting the information, the good news is we're getting nothing but head nods.
Oh, yeah.
Like, oh yeah, this is good.
Good head nods.
Yeah. The C-suite is just bobbing, like, yeah. They did ask a few questions, but each and every question that they threw our team's way, we had an answer for. The Q&A session it was way shorter than it typically would be. So once again, we're feeling really good about ourselves.
And so what was the big punchline or takeaway from this meeting?
It was more of a punch in the gut than a punch line. We expected, it went in our heads, right, a round of applause at the end of the presentation, like a standing O. Instead, the CEO passed a piece of paper over to us, like slid it over, like where you're expecting a dollar figure on the other side, and it was. But you could tell he already had that prepared going into the meeting. So we went through this whole process of putting together a budget that really made sense with all our asks on there and justification. And then we get the paper slide where it's like, here's your budget, which was less, not only less than what we were asking for, but less than the previous year.
What was your reaction to that?
So my initial knee-jerk reaction was shock. Of, okay, I wasted a lot of time and effort trying to figure this thing out. My other initial reaction walking out of the room was, I'm going to have to pull the recruiters together and really lay into them about this upcoming year. Double your efforts, right? You're going to have to do more.
Let me pass along that punch in the gut.
Honestly, that was my reaction of, okay, in my head, I'm starting to plan this meeting that's going to be like, you've got to do more. So that was my initial reaction. But that didn't happen. I did have a moment of inspiration where I thought, before I bring all the recruiters together, why don't I grab one of our top recruiters and just do kind of one-on-one meeting and share this information. And so that's what I did. I grabbed her. She was a phenomenal recruiter. Still is. She's moved on to other companies, is doing some really great things. Mm-hmm. And so I explained the number of hires that were expected.
Right.
And she was like, okay, like, I think we can do it. And I'm like, yeah, we can do it. So she was like, okay, cool. Well, like, what new technologies are we going to get? What does our budget look like? Because to get there, she was thinking we've got to get more.
But just so clear, the number of drivers that they expected you to hire, was that more than the previous year?
Yes, with a smaller budget.
Right. Okay. Really was a good 1-2 to the gut.
It was. And so I shared that information with her. She basically laughed. Right? Like, no, seriously. She was like, what are we getting?
Yeah.
And I'm like, no. Like, this is the plan for the upcoming year.
You get nothing. You lose. Good day, sir.
It turned from laughing to crying, or maybe it was anger.
Right.
Based off of that, I knew I couldn't call a meeting with the recruiters and just say, here's the plan, make it happen.
Yeah.
Right? Just do it. So at that time, once I started looking at things, we were converting at about 1 in 40.
1 in
Right?
40.
1 in 40 was kind of that ratio, lead to hire ratio. So I asked myself the question of, what happened to the other 39? Right? We paid for 40 leads, we hired 1, where are the other 39? So tried to break down that process to say, okay, the funnel.
Right.
Of what is each step, major step in this process, and where might we be losing potential hires along the way?
What are all the processes within this funnel that you decided were like, all right, this is a major stage, this is your next stage. So break that down for us real quick.
Okay, so the major stages are, the first one being target, right? That's the top of your funnel.
Right.
And it's a matter of making sure that the leads you're paying for are coming into your system and going to the right people.
Right.
The next step in the process is nothing can really happen until a conversation happens. So you've got to get in touch with the drivers, whether that be through text, email, or best yet, over the phone. As you're engaging, one of the primary purposes of this stage is, are they qualified or are they not qualified?
Qualification. So we basically got total leads, contact rate, qualification rate. Now what?
Now that you've got the two groups of unqualified and qualified, you break it down with that qualified and say, out of that group of qualified drivers, how many of them can we commit to come and work with us? Even once you've got them scheduled for orientation.
They know. They know.
They know. There is the potential to be ghosted.
I hear that a lot, the whole, they ghosted me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big thing because there's lots of options.
What do you think is happening there, by the way? I'm going to take a quick sip of water. What do you think is happening there is it just a myriad of reasons why drivers ghost, or is it generally they found something better?
The primary reason is they found something better. Maybe a secondary reason is, as they've learned more about the position, there's something that maybe scared them or that they didn't like. Maybe they found out that you do hair follicle testing instead of just,
I guess the main point here is that just because you schedule a drive for orientation, that's not like 100% they're showing up. Which brings us, I think, to our next stage, which is what? Show rate. Yes, I want to be part of your fleet. How many of them actually show up for orientation?
Yep, exactly. Even once they show up, there's still a number of things that have to happen. A road test, VOEs are still coming in where it may raise some red flags. So there's still a number of things that have to happen in order for that driver to be fully hired.
Right. So you got total leads coming in.
Yep.
How many of those leads are you able to contact? How many of those leads that you contacted are qualified? How many of those qualified leads are you able to schedule for orientation? Yep. How many of those scheduled for orientation actually show up to orientation? And then once they show up to orientation, how many of those are you actually putting inside of a truck?
Well, you could even break that apart and say, how many of those that show up to orientation are hired?
Oh.
And then how many of that are hired
Right.
get in a truck.
Why'd you break all this down?
In order to find, once again, those 39 that weren't hired, maybe there was something in our process where instead of it being 1 in 40, it could be 1 in 35 or 1 in 30.
Right.
Because if we're getting maybe less budgets or even the same, it would still translate into fewer leads.
Right.
Which means we've got to be more efficient with the leads we get.
What did you find within that process? What was the big takeaway?
I'm kind of a data nerd. So I wanted to break it down into percentages and say what percentage of our overall leads do get contacted, are qualified, are committed to orientation, so on and so forth. So once I had all the percentages figured out, in my mind, I was thinking, if I could impact one of these stages, where should we start? What would have the biggest impact if I could improve it by even 5 percentage points?
Right.
Where would we get the most hires? Let's start there.
I would assume just because you're not getting more budget, you can almost take total leads off of that.
Right, because a lot of people would say, well, yeah, let's just throw more leads.
Dump more leads in there.
Easy peasy.
Yeah, and you're like, well, that's not an option. So
That's
now
right.
you're looking at all those other phases.
Yep.
Did you have a hunch going into it of what you thought it would be?
My hunch was, I did. It was, in my mind, where the biggest impact was is if we could just get a hold of more drivers.
Right.
If we could just do that, I'm confident we would see a huge increase in hires.
And what did you find?
That was not true. Now, of course, it had an impact.
Right. It all has an
impact. But what I found was that committing drivers to orientation, scheduling them for orientation, if I could improve that category alone, it would have the biggest impact, almost threefold of any other stage.
Say that again. So I must say it again. Just improving. If you were to look at all those areas and say, I'm going to improve each of them by 5 base percentage points.
Right.
The impact that the schedule for orientation rate would have outweighs the other ones, any other single category, by threefold.
Correct.
Wow.
Boom.
And so essentially what does that mean? I mean, it's kind of, I feel like everyone watching this is like, well, we know what that means, but go ahead and spell it out for us. What does that mean when you see that?
One of the most important things we could focus on was what is happening when we did all this work to get them on the phone, did all this work to make sure that it's a qualified lead, and we had a conversation with them. Why could we not get them to commit to come to work with us? And what happens during that stage is the conversation with the driver.
Right. So essentially, at that point, you were committed to helping your recruiters have better conversations.
That's
what
right.
did you do to help them have better conversations?
Until we had the technology in place, sitting and listening with them, right? And then eventually we were able to get call recording in place where we give them access and have them, for one-on-ones, pick out a call that either went well or didn't go well.
Right.
And we'd sit down and listen to it together and discuss, hey, on future calls and in future similar situations, how do you handle it?
Once you focused on the idea that I need to help my recruiters have better conversations, what were some of the big takeaways that you found?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was a lack of empathy. They had this feeling of, man, I've had so many conversations today. And once you get in that mindset, in that mode, every conversation begins to sound the same, to where you could literally take out the driver speaking portion of a call and just listen to the recruiter.
Yeah.
And from one call to the next, they all sounded the same. Which you would think, oh, well, if they're doing a good job, that's probably fine, which might be true. But the lack of empathy is not treating that driver like an individual,
right,
but making a lot of assumptions as to, this is the 100th person I've spoken with today. They all ask the same questions. I'm just going to start out by giving them the answers before they ever ask.
What was the impact of that realization over the course of the next year?
It was exactly what we anticipated, which is our lead to hire ratio improved from 1 in 40 to 1 in like the low 30s. So that doesn't sound like a significant maybe impact, right? Like, okay, it took 7 fewer leads to get a hire. But when you're hiring 5,000 drivers a year.
Yeah. That adds up quick.
That adds up real quick, especially now when you look at a cost per lead and the way that the market's been going. That's a significant difference in costs and even hires that you're able to get into a truck.
And I imagine that's really relevant to most of our clients because, and we've talked about this on this show a bunch of times, of pretty much none of these process improvements will have the amount of effect that you need to actually reach capacity for the most part.
Right.
You're going to have to spend more. You're probably going to have to do pay raises, all these things. However, it can't hurt. Still having some modicum of efficiency improvement, or you're talking about effectiveness here,
right,
will have a profound effect. Even with if you're able to spend way more on recruiting, if you could get that lead to hire ratio from 1 in 34 to 1 in 28, oh my goodness, that's just going to have such a massive effect.
That's right. So you're right. It's not hey, this is the solution that's going to fix everything.
Right.
But it is hey, take these different things, and I think you all covered 9 last time, right?
Yeah.
So here's another one that by focusing on this and adding in these other parts, you're going to make improvements. Your money's going to go further.
And would you say, I feel like this is true, there's not a market in which lead to hire ratio doesn't matter?
It's always relevant, yeah, because by nature, directors of marketing, directors of recruiting, they should be and are paying attention to cost per hire.
Right.
Right, and volume and open trucks, it's part of the job.
We have found just in our own data that lead to hire ratio, I think we did an entire segment on this. Lead to hire ratio is generally the thing that correlates most to your cost per hire.
I mean, you'll have some people challenge that idea and say, well, my lead to hire ratio is 1 to 200, but gosh, those 200 leads we're getting are super cheap. But you think of the time, just the sheer time it takes to work 200 leads, are you really saving any money? Because that takes so much more time than it takes to efficiently and effectively work 30 leads or 40.
Is it worth every fleet seeing where they can make the biggest impact along that pipeline? Or do you think pretty much the answer for everyone's going to be, are you able to get qualified drivers scheduled for orientation? Is that where most people are going to have the biggest impact?
For 90%, that's going to have the biggest impact. And I don't put it at 100% only because I've come across one situation where that wasn't the case, doing some recruiter training. This group was excellent. They were really, really good. And so for them, it actually was getting in touch with the driver.
Right.
But that was the exception by far.
Where along that funnel do you think is probably number 2? Just guessing.
90% of the time, number 1's going to be the same.
Yeah.
I don't think that holds true for number 2. It depends on the fleet. Some are really good about those who are scheduled to show up to orientation, about getting those drivers in, because they focus on that process. But I would say typically, we'll just go with typically,
okay.
It is that contact.
Contact rate?
Yep.
That's what I was going to guess, because I've heard many a fleet that has unable to contact as a status within their ATS.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that it truly does become an efficiency funnel where you say, what type of technology or what type of automation can we put there to help with it?
Is there anything you would add to all of this, or maybe an anecdote from your past life that you would add into all of that?
This often gets a little bit of pushback, this concept. A director or somebody, and we all do this, if you're managing people, you want to protect your people, where it's not my people. My average tenure for a recruiter is 10 years.
Right.
And my response to that is, hey, do they actually have 10 years of experience or 1 year of experience repeated 10 times? Deep, right?
And I think the example for that you use, which I really like, is how often do you type?
Right.
And it's like, well, I type every day. And it's like, well, you're getting better. You're not actually taking time out of your day to improve at typing. You're just repeating what you already know, which you would say many people that recruit truck drivers do the same thing.
Sure.
They had that first year where they learned some things, and now they've been repeating it for 10 years, and they're not getting better.
Right. The principles will always stay the same.
Right.
But things have changed. And so if you're still taking the same approach as 10 years ago, you're probably missing out.
Well, I think we'll end it there. I hope you stick around for the Q&A. Also, we have an efficiency formula where you can input all of your data into and see what your conversion rate is, and then you can do the math and see where you can make the biggest impact. But thanks for showing up, and sorry I was scratching my arm the whole time I said that, and see you next time. Bye. Smells like McDonald's. Making me hungry.
And there's our blooper for the week.
All right, so where were we?